More thumbs up, some more head nods. I'm just gonna wait for Commissioner Herzog to come back, and then, oh, there he is. Awesome. I guess all right. Call to order. This is the meeting of the Board of Police Commissions, July 28th, 2020. Doing a roll call determination. Look like we have a full quorum here, and I want to welcome our two newest commissioners, Milo Grant and Karen Durfee. Welcome. Very happy to have you all here. Public service isn't easy, but we need people to step up and do these things. So thank you for answering the call.
Thank you.
Awesome. And I'll move to agenda item 3, additions or modifications to the agenda. I am not seeing any, so we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is the public forum. And I'll hand it off to Shannon.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm wondering, was there something on the agenda about the social media policy?
No, there's nothing on the agenda about social media policy.
There is quite a full agenda. I'll just save that then, and we'll talk about that at the end and push it out to next time.
Sounds good. All right, then moving on to agenda item number 4, public forum.
So I had Sylvia Knight had requested to speak, and then she emailed me. She wasn't able to make it. And then I have Gwen, and Gwen, unless you're on a different name, I don't see you in the list. And let me just take a quick, my phone is having some email issues here, but I don't see Gwen. So I do happen to, last call for Gwen. I don't see her.
All right, then moving on to agenda item number 5, the chief's report. Chief Murat.
Hi, thank you, and hello, everybody. In the 34 days since our last meeting, which was Tuesday, June 23rd, so from 6/24 through and by the way, Nancy Stetson is telling me that Zoom is broken for her, Shannon, that she's not able to get in. So if you can take a look at that.
I did have some people email me, and I've responded. The email, there's people on that use that. If you want to go to the police commission webpage and click the link that's there, I was able to just do that. And I did click the link that I gave Nancy in the email, and it worked for me as well. So I'll try to send her a note here too. Sorry.
Okay. Try to go to you said to the police commission webpage, Shannon?
Yes. Although I did click the link that I gave her in the email, and it worked as well. So
right.
Brian is saying the same thing, but
yeah, Brian is saying the same thing. So
I'll work with it.
So from June 24th until July 27th, yesterday, we've had 2,484 calls for service. 27 of those were assaults, and 8 of those were aggravated assaults, i.e. Felonious assaults. There were 7 sex assaults, 5 robberies. There were 199 suspicious events, 135 noise complaints, 114 disturbances, 107 vehicle crashes, of which 34 were leaving the scene of an accident where the person fled. There were 8 of those vehicle crashes that involved injuries. There were 103 traffic calls, which are different than a vehicle crash, 76 foot patrols, 74 threats or harassment calls, 73 domestic incidents, which include 69 domestic disturbances and 3 domestic violence misdemeanors and 1 domestic violence felony. There were 67 calls for fireworks, although there were actually more than that, because in some instances, fireworks that come in are stacked into a single incident over the course of a night. That certainly happened on the 4th of July because it was so busy with fireworks calls that night. And overall, there were 10 overdoses to which officers responded and 5 untimely deaths. And I put all this into context simply to point out the work that the men and women of the Burlington Police Department do. That's a real volume. It is by volume and variety greater than any other department, municipal or otherwise, in the state, insofar as a per officer basis of calls. And each of those takes a toll. It's hard work that these men and women do, and they do it in exemplary fashion. And I think that as we go forward and start to look at what policing is, what policing does in this city, the volume of work that is done, and question what volume of that can be diverted to other non-existent resources that we can either build or existent resources that we can bolster, it's good to look at what is actually being done and the costs and benefits that we get from the men and women of this department as they do that work. They do it very, very well. So that is my chief's report. But yes, Commissioner.
No, I apologize for jumping in. I was just wondering if those stats can be distributed to us in writing prior to each meeting going forward.
Of course. Well, I mean, I crunched it about half an hour ago, so yeah, I don't mind giving it to you beforehand. But it's you know, it
doesn't need to be far in advance for those.
You know, if we want to make it something that doesn't include, I mean, as I said, I only ran through yesterday, so technically this could have been run this morning and had the same results. If it's something that that you all want to see on a recurring basis, these same categories, if there are other categories, I mean, I pulled the categories that are certainly, I think, you know, 27 assaults and 8 of them felonious, I think 7 sex assaults and 5 robberies. Those are not inconsequential crimes. And Burlington, we are an incredibly safe community, but there is crime here, and it is real. I think that that's worth keeping in mind to a certain extent. The other calls are calls that are frequent ones that are broken down, for example, in the ward by ward breakdown we provided to the city council in advance of the budget discussions. And so those were the sort of categories I went with. If there are other categories of interest, or if this is something that we want to recurringly do, I don't have an objection to that at all. And I can try to provide it to you with some degree of lead time. That'd be my pleasure.
Thank you.
I won't speak for everybody, but I would certainly like to see get like a list like a day or two before our next meeting. Absolutely. I think I saw a hand raised by Commissioner Grant.
Yes, I would also agree with that. I think that's really important information. I'm actually surprised that it's not shared every meeting, and I think that would be very beneficial. I also like to know, because I do remember it being sent out. I saw it on Front Porch Forum. I saw it shared on Twitter, the department's Twitter feed. Under normal circumstances, is that just information that's never made public?
Which information?
The information that you just gave us. Like, I know you can go to the department's site and you can see where different things are occurring in each ward, and there's like little dots. But in terms of the way that you just presented that information, is that anywhere for the public to view?
So I believe it is. Nancy Stetson, who's our data analyst and who is, I believe, watching from YouTube right now, and I don't think is yet on the conversation. I think Shannon's working on that. We'll probably be able to answer that. She's having a problem with the links. So Shannon, if you're listening to me, she's saying that she tried both those links, but neither worked, and it came up with an invalid link ID. So insofar as the detail, yeah, I believe that this is something that you can run in the data portal. I think you have to know the categories that are being requested, but I don't know that for sure, so we can look into it. Insofar as me providing it on a recurring basis, I have, again, that's something we can do. We'll do it at the next meeting and the next one and the one after that.
So if you can do it in that format, and then it would, I think we'd want to, I believe that it'd be very beneficial to have the public see that information in the synopsis that you just provided. I'm not sure how easy it would be for people if they had to go in and run something and put in categories and things like that. You just gave a really nice synopsis that I just think not enough people, they don't know. They don't know. Like, when I saw that information that came up before the budget, I was like, oh, why am I seeing this the first time? And I live in a ward that apparently I know has more incidents than other wards, but was really dramatically higher than other wards. And I, as a citizen living in this ward, was not available. I've also never had any outreach saying, hey, here's what you as a citizen can do to assist us in these specific incidents that occur at a high rate in your ward. So those are just some thoughts I have on that information. I think it'd be very helpful to disseminate that to the public.
If I could just jump in. So, I mean, the information is on the data portal, but it's usually, there's usually pretty a long lead time for it. So I think, if I remember correctly, I don't even know if 2019 data is up right now. I know 2018 data is up. 2019 data might be up. I see Nancy Stetson is raising her hand right now in the chat, so she can certainly inform that better than I. But the data is on the portal. It's just oftentimes not completely up to date.
So can we do something to, if we have the capability to run the data and have it, discuss it at a monthly meeting, why can't we post that in some way? Can we look into that so that we have people looking at more current data?
Yeah, I mean, no objection here.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would also, I recommend that we move agenda item number 8, incorporated into this this chief's report, the whole wellness piece. I see that I'm flagged. I didn't catch this on the earlier conversation on the agenda. I see that I'm flagged on that because it was a recommendation of mine, you know, but I think it would be, you know, most suitable for this to be under the chief's report, the wellness piece. And I'd also say that, you know, it'd be a good idea to hear what the force strength is in terms of where we are at head count at this juncture as well.
So our current head count is what it was during the budget discussions. We are currently at 91 sworn, 90 effective. One of those sworn is long-term sick. And insofar as the wellness piece, you know, I'm still not entirely certain what you meant by officer wellness, Commissioner. And I don't know that I'd want to put it in the chief's report. If it's morale, I mean, we can certainly talk about morale. It's not great right now. And that has to do with the same reasons that we are, you know, I think that there are national reasons for that. I think there are local reasons for that. And while I did say that we are currently still at 90, 91, that's going to change next week. I anticipate at least 2 coming, and there are others that I believe are probably on the way. And we're going to start getting closer to that 80 number that I talked about during budget discussions as a trigger point for potential emergency staffing, and also, or potentially, you know, losing overnight coverage. And as we get closer and closer to 74. And neither of those is a sure thing. Those are all things that are going to have to be determined as we continue to lose headcount, but they are possibilities. But so morale, no, morale's hard. Officers are having a tough time right now. They are continuing to do amazing work. The volume that I just described is indicative of the fact that they're out there. I mean, I mentioned, you know, however many foot patrols it was, 76 foot patrols in 34 days. That's officers getting out of their car, continuing to engage in a proactive way with people. And that says a lot for them still to be out there doing that kind of work and not merely responding to calls. We'll lose that if we lose headcount, and we will become almost entirely responsive the closer we get to, you know, 74 or lower. But other forms of wellness, you know, I'm not entirely certain what you had in mind by that phrase.
I'm happy to
work on it.
I'm happy to follow up with it to provide some clarity to define this idea of wellness. And I just give you a heads up. It'll be as it's laid out in the pillar that's identified in the president's final report on 21st century policing. So we'll come back to that. Thank you.
Anything further of the chief's report?
No, that's it for me for the chief's report, although I think I have the next agenda item as well.
Yeah, yes, you do. I'll be agenda item 6, the traffic reports.
Yes, so the traffic report. So the traffic report was appended. It was sent to everyone. It is a public document. It was released last week along with a press release. And it is the 3rd annual traffic report that we've done. I think that the data that it showed is really good. We talked about this at length last year. I presented to the police commission in August of last year on this topic. And many of the issues that we discussed then are still extant now. I think that there was some media coverage that I think was a little bit erroneous insofar as talking about the level of disparity that remains. There are some disparities that we still see in traffic. They are tremendously reduced over the past several years. And that is the real story of this traffic report. There is no direct way to measure the demography of Burlington's drivers. There's no way to say this is the drivers. I mean, we have a constitutional census that looks at our demography as a people. That is not drivers. And of the many ways to estimate driver demography, the census is the worst way. It does not account for visitors. It does not account for people who transit through a city. It does not account for students and tourists. It doesn't really look at whether or not there are age differences within census cohorts. Crash data is a far more fair way of assessing driver demography. It gives an accurate picture of who's actually on the road because there is nothing that suggests that one race gets involved in more crashes than any other race. And by looking at crash data, Black drivers are represented in 8.4% of crashes. And looking at our traffic stop data, Black drivers are represented in 9.5% of stops. And that is when we're dealing with, that means 191 stops. And that 1.1% is essentially statistically insignificant. And it is not suggestive that Burlington police, quote unquote, from at least one media report, continue to stop Black drivers at higher rates compared to the city's white residents. That's simply not true. Insofar as ticketing is concerned, some of the media people who reviewed it entirely ignored the reason for the differences in ticket issuance. And there we still do have some racial disparity. The vast majority of stops, first of all, result in a warning, not in a ticket. But both our press release and this report pointed out that when a driver lacks a valid license, an officer must issue a ticket and prevent the driver from continuing to drive. That's what happens when you don't have a valid license. Among drivers stopped, 11.5% of Black drivers had a suspended license or no license, compared to 3.2% of white drivers. And that creates a disparity there. That fact alone contributes to the fact that 12% of traffic stops with white drivers resulted in a ticket, compared to 16% of traffic stops with Black drivers. So 12 to 16, that is a disparity. However, if we exclude stops where valid licenses, where there was no valid license, if we look only at the stops where there was a valid license, that ticket disparity changes. And we see a rate that is 8.9% of white drivers with a valid license get a ticket, and 6.5% of Black drivers with a valid license get a ticket. So the so-called disparity actually reverses itself. And that says a lot about where this agency has gone with regard to traffic enforcement. It has really looked at itself. That was driven largely by changes from Chief Del Pozo. Now, we have seen that crashes have remained low. But we've also seen that crashes with injury and crashes overall are trending up slightly. There may be a limit to the extent to which we can prioritize engagement and education over enforcement and still see traffic safety results. And that limit may be coming. I think that we have actually gotten to a point where we are not issuing enough traffic enforcement. I think that I hear the same thing back when we had NPA meetings in person. I heard that as a recurring theme in almost every neighborhood of the city, that the people who go to MPAs wanted more traffic enforcement. They want more traffic presence. And so, where are we with that? I think we're going to have to look at the data and see. But that is merely going to change the rate at which we issue tickets versus warnings. It should not change the rate at which we are stopping drivers. Insofar as that goes, with regard to driving population as measured by crash data and driving population and the stops, percentage of driving of people in stops, we're not seeing the kinds of disparities that some of the headlines would have led you to believe.
I have a question about, just a quick question. I'll have more questions following up, but you're talking about the possibility that if the goal is to minimize traffic crashes and crashes with injury, You suggested that the department might have to look at changing its traffic enforcement strategy if those numbers continue to trend upwards. So, and then you also said, based on your conversations at local meetings, et cetera, that you think that we might be getting to the limit there. So, first question is, do you have any reason other than the number of crashes to think that the department is not prioritizing traffic enforcement enough right now?
Well, I think that you can look at the historical numbers and the plummet of traffic engagement. As I pointed out in some of the budget discussions, at least 61% of our decrease in type 1 calls can be attributed to proactive decisions on officers' parts not to engage in that enforcement. I mean, traffic enforcement alone contributes not to 61%, but to a large percentage of the drop in type 1 calls. And traffic enforcement is an officer decision. You see an act, you take action on it. What is your threshold for that? That's an officer discretion issue. And I think that we, as a department, did in fact communicate to officers, either directly or indirectly, that traffic stops were potentially fraught interactions with the public. They were interactions that could lead to issues with the community relations that we wish to foster among our neighbors. And yet, there is also an obligation to keep the roadways safe. That is part of what officers do. We respond to and prevent crime and disorder. And certain behaviors on the road are disorderly, certain behaviors on the road are criminal. And it is about keeping people safe. That's the primary mission. So to the extent that enforcing driving behavior is about safety, I think that also, when you see a reduction of the scope that we saw, and I don't have that sheet right in front of me, but it's 3,000 something down to 300 something. I mean, or about 1,200, 3,000 something to 1,200. That kind of that kind of drop is an officer engagement choice. It's not merely whether or not it's a changing of the threshold for which you enact a stop. And some of those cases, that's good. Do we need to make a stop for every single person who forgets to use a blinker when there's no one else around and there's no real safety implication for that, forgetting to use a blinker? No. Do we need to for people who are running through stop signs in neighborhoods where kids play? Do we need to for people who are speeding on Battery or up Main Street? Yes, we do. And so I don't have anything, more, but I do see the data, and the data trends make me wonder whether or not we need to revisit some of that discretion on traffic stops.
So I'll ask the question again a little more. So, are you worried that traffic enforcement is lower than it should be for any reasons other than the crash information?
Crash information, and as I said, neighbor comments in NPAs and other places in which I talk to neighbors. So
that's also driving your concern that there might need to be more traffic enforcement, or just neighbor comments?
I think that there are many other ways to address traffic issues and to keep people safe on the road. And again, that is the primary goal, keeping people safe on the road. And engineering mechanisms are terrific, and we've seen them work. It takes a long time to get an engineering mechanism. There's a long waiting list. You have to get a lot of signatures. Neighborhoods complain about needs for it and the long wait. And whether we're talking about roads that are used as as sort of bypasses, even though they're not really graded for that, whether we are talking about neighborhoods who want issues, people who feel that this particular stop sign here is routinely ignored. We can deploy officers to those and try to engage in either enforcement or engagement and education. But yeah, I hear that, and the crash data are what largely are going to drive me. I don't really know what else would, aside from looking for roadway data and actually measuring speeds, et cetera, in the vicinity of the juggle handle or on East Avenue, for example. And we do that as well. But we do look, that tends to be a DOT or a DPW prerogative to really do that kind of deep dive. But it's not something that we would not use if we started to hear of problems. Because sometimes when we hear of problems from individual neighbors that don't comport with our own observations, we will start looking at more forms of data about whether or not we can support or maybe sort of gently dissuade that neighbor from his or her convincing, his or her belief that there's a huge amount of speeding on this road or routine stop sign evasion on this road.
Right. Okay. So I'll make the point then clear at this point. Right. So so some people might think that traffic enforcement is also valuable insofar as it allows a kind of an alternate pathway to other kinds of law enforcement, right? So if you're concerned about other kinds of law enforcement, concerned about wanting to do more, kind of do more warrant checks, you're wondering about wanting to do more drug searches, things like that, you can say, oh, obviously traffic enforcement is used in some locations as a way of doing those other kinds of law enforcement goals, achieving those other kinds of law enforcement goals. I'm happy that you're not talking about thinking that traffic enforcement is down because it's not allowing you to do the other kinds of law enforcement that you might want to do. And so I would encourage you to continue to think of traffic enforcement primarily as a way of guaranteeing, roadway safety. And then I would just say also, I don't see a concern right now, given the kind of the small numbers in the data and the ways in which data is always subject to various kinds of, ebbs and flows. I don't see right now a kind of the same kind of trend upwards as you see, I guess, especially with respect to crashes with injury. And I think that there might be all sorts of other reasons for the other kinds of trends, which are staying, I think, still pretty flat. But obviously that can be looked at over longer periods of time. But yeah, so I would encourage you to think about traffic enforcement just as a way of ensuring roadway safety rather than other kinds of law enforcement. And I don't see right now a need to kind of increase that, given the other sorts of costs that come with increasing traffic enforcement, right? Other just increases in encounters with citizens just in ordinary sense.
Gotcha.
I think I saw Commissioner Grant with a question.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Chief, you mentioned type 1 traffic incidents. What exactly are those? And what are other types in a nutshell?
So not type 1 traffic incidents, but type 1 calls. And that goes back to a document that I shared with the police commission previously, but also that I shared with the city during the budget discussions. And there are 3 types of calls. We have tiered calls with regard to the immediacy of life safety that's involved in those calls. And, the bulk of the calls that police answer are type 1 calls that don't involve necessarily immediate life safety. They are calls, excuse me. And actually the document that you mentioned seeing with the wards broken out and the level of crime in each ward, that talked about the type 1 and type 2. And in fact, it had the whole piece on what those types were. But type 1 are traffic calls and noise complaints and suspicious events. And also, suspicious event is going to be the largest in a lot of wards. It's essentially a catch-all for something doesn't feel right. It is the result of a society that has been telling itself, see something, say something for 3 decades now. Type 2 are involve people's safety or in progress crimes like disorderly conduct, disturbances, larceny from a person, mental health issues. And type 3 is the most severe call. It includes assaults, domestic violence, robberies, and those are things to which we're always going to prioritize our response because they involve keeping people safe, which, as I said, is the core of what we do.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions for the chief from the traffic report?
Commissioner Hughes has a hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hughes.
I wanted to thank you, John, for the report. And also, I'm just going back to the update on the work of the department. Just for clarity and also for the sake of those who are new commissioners, this report is released on an annual basis, correct? I think you said that.
The traffic report, sir?
Yes.
Yep, this is the 3rd traffic report.
So I was wondering if you could just take a little time and explain for me and maybe for the couple of the other commissioners the genesis of this and the objective of it. I just want to understand when did this start? What are we aiming to do with it? What's our objective? And finally, I'd want to understand if this cannot be automated in such a way that we're not waiting on an annual basis to see this. And I don't mean, I think you know what I mean. I mean just something that's just dashboard instead of waiting for an annual report. And I would add, ask a question to this. Is it not true that we've been doing these reports with the crash data for the last for all 3 years?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we're not talking about a change or anything in you, because you placed a lot of emphasis on the difference, but really
because I was frankly surprised that the media, knowing that we have been using crash data as our proxy for driver demographics for the past 3 years because it is the most accurate and most academically acceptable, still persists in using census data because it makes the situation look worse than it is.
Thank you. Now, can I finish my question?
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Sir?
I do have the floor, right?
Yeah, yep.
Okay. All right. So what I'm getting at here is that I just want to understand the genesis of the report, and what the intention is, and also if there were, if you could explain to us what the what the intention is. I guess that's all I'm really getting at. That is my question.
So what was the purpose of the report? I think that it was a matter of, insofar as the purpose of the report is a sense that there are questions about traffic. There were issues with vehicle stop data. I believe that a professor at UVM did a study on it and published, information about statewide vehicle stop data. And I believe that then Chief Del Pozo really wanted to dig into what this city was doing. And there were issues there. I think we've seen the change in disparity for stops and certainly for searches change over the years that this report has been done. There were 0 searches of drivers of color done this year, of Black drivers. And that plays into something that I think that Commissioner Harp was getting at with regard to, are vehicle stops being used as an interdiction tool? They are not being used in that way unless there is specific intelligence driving that interdiction decision. And that's long-term investigations that say there's individuals in this car, or a stop that has to do not with narcotics interdiction, but a wanted person in a specific vehicle. Those are always going to remain tools of the police. But insofar as stops for motor vehicle violations in hopes of finding other kinds of things, no, that is not it's not a useful.
Started and what is the purpose?
I'm sorry.
Why was this report started, and what is the purpose of it? That's all I'm asking you.
I thought I was in the process of answering that it was something that was it was looked at on the state level, and Chief Del Pozo wanted to take a look at the way in which our data really did break down. And I think that we ended up having a different picture than the state at large. I think this year's report is definitely a different picture. And it indicates, an agency that is responsive to its own data and responsive to the needs of its neighbors insofar as examining its actions.
My question was, are we planning on automating this?
I'm sorry?
I said, the last part of my question was, are we planning on automating this so we're not waiting on an annual basis to see this report? Is there any plans on doing that? Is that a Nancy question?
Could be a Nancy question. I mean, can we automate it? I think that part of the issue here is that the longer.
If there was any plans on doing it.
Well,
so
you just raised that. Did I have a plan for it? No. I think that it's better to have a longer period of time in order to examine the data and see what trends have developed in it. And I think that an automated dashboard can sort of give you false pictures of data over shorter time periods than real results can be seen, as Commissioner Hart mentioned with regards to wanting to see more crash data before we make decisions about changing enforcement strategies.
So the last thing here is regarding you said in your report, this media release regarding the traffic stops with Black drivers, you said something like there was an issuance of 12% of traffic stops with white drivers resulted in tickets compared to 16% traffic stops with Black drivers. And then you went on to say, quote, but this stems not from officer discretion, but from the fact that 11.5% of Black drivers stopped had a suspended license or no license compared to 3.2% of white drivers. Isn't the decision to stop them in the first place discretion?
Well, it's discretion in the sense, yes, but what we're seeing is that there is no difference in the stop rate. The stop rate is a driving population of 8.6 versus a stop population of 9.4. And when we're talking about the level of numbers that we're talking about, it's not statistically significant. You're talking about the difference in issuance. And what my point is the issuance of enforcement is not a discretionary issue when there is no license in play.
You're telling me that if I had no license, that an officer has he has no choice but to give me a ticket?
You can't drive away. You have no license.
Well, thank you. No further questions.
I had a question.
Oh, go ahead, please. Hello.
I just wanted to know, so in terms of automating the information, can't we constantly be looking at like year-to-date information? Well, no, actually not year-to-date, but look the past year. So if we start loading it on at a certain point, then we can always be seeing the trends, say, on a monthly basis, if we're always looking a year back. So I think that's something to think about in terms of looking at that information more regularly and also allowing the public to see that information. And then with regards to the higher number of issuances due to the lack of a driver's license, is there, probably not, but I'm just asking, is there anything that tracks the reason why someone says they don't have a license?
So are you asking, for example, does the person have a suspended license owing to financial reasons, or does the person have a suspended license owing to perhaps driving behaviors like driving under the influence or routine speeding or safety issues? Or does the person not have a license because he or she wasn't able to navigate the license process and just is driving without a license at all?
Exactly.
No,
all of the
sure.
above.
And there is no way to measure that. I have had discussions with the state's attorney about whether or not, those kinds of things could be explored. And I think that we could look into as a state, but this is a difference between what a police department can do and its officers can do when confronted with a situation in the field and the amount of knowledge they don't have, versus what a state or a society can choose to do with regard to saying we're going to somehow start tiering these and say that we are going to decide that people who don't pay their fines, there's no consequence for their not paying fines and they get to keep their license, or that there's other kinds of consequence, or we are not going to take away their license. But there are reasons why we've gotten where we've gotten. If you don't have insurance, it's a risk to other people. It's unfair to the people that you are putting at risk.
I'm not questioning that. I'm just saying that there may be instances that maybe some individuals, depending on their situation, may just need a little bit community help. Maybe it doesn't fall on the city or the state, or like for someone who wasn't able to navigate that process for some reason, whatever that would be. These are things I want to consider in terms of when we look at not only things like this, but also I think Chief Morrison referred to it as I think she said backstop. I'm not sure the types of calls that occur when people feel they can't call anybody else. So I just wanted to put that out there, that would be interesting to have that kind of data, or offer people, get something in place where people can make a phone call and say, hey, I got this ticket and I don't have a license, and someone can discuss, what the reason is. Like maybe nothing can be done because, as you said, they had an issue with drinking, or they had an issue with fines. But I'd just be curious as to how we can get that down.
I think I saw Commissioner Harp with a comment. One was it, or was that?
Yeah, no, that is. Thank you. So I'm still wondering about whether or not there are any kind of lurking residuals of officer discretion in the traffic reports. So, one, which obviously this is a vanishingly small number of the searches that are in the report, but you talk about the number of kind of stops owing to investigatory reasons, and so you had a conversation with Commissioner Hughes earlier about kind of if there are kind of investigations in progress and intelligence about drivers of the vehicle. Are those the sorts of things that would fall into the category of investigatory stops?
Yes, although this is a place where I might defer to analyst Stetson insofar as sort of what's in that investigatory category. I'm sorry, it's hung up on a wire here. What's in that investigatory category? But yes, an example would be a stop that is dictated by the fact that witnesses saw a person assault someone and then leap into this specific car with full or partial plate or ID of car, and a stop is made of that vehicle down the road. That's an investigatory stop.
Okay.
But I think Nancy can answer that. Nancy, is that right?
Sure. There's two different categories that are similar but different. There's investigatory stops, and then there's externally generated stops. And as I understand it, investigatory stops are stops like what Chief Murad said, where an officer sees something and responds to it. An externally generated stop is a stop where there's a call to stop a specific car that comes either from another investigation, or on occasion there's like, if people suspect, a citizen suspects a DUI and will call in a certain car. And then like, if that car is stopped, that's not officer discretion. So those externally generated stops are actually excluded from this analysis. There were maybe like 30 last year. So there's not a ton.
Sorry, so those externally generated stops don't always require another law enforcement agency to make that request. That can be done by a member of the public?
Yes, yep. I've seen that on occasion.
Okay, and then where would those numbers be? So you said those were excluded from the investigatory stops category. Where would those show up?
I excluded them. I follow the literature on how to do this traffic stop analysis, and those are generally excluded. I can put them in the public data if that's requested.
Yeah, that was the question. Are there other important categories that are excluded from this data?
Accidents. Any ticket that goes along with an accident or crash, motor vehicle crash, sorry.
Okay, even if there are other tickets which aren't just related to the crash itself?
I'm not sure what you mean. As I consider it, if an officer responds to a crash, it should be—
It's not a traffic stop.
It's not a traffic stop. It should count in that externally generated category.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the second question then, this is for Chief Murad again, was just, so the number of discretionary searches has been down drastically since 2016. Do you have any reason to believe that that's having a negative impact on enforcement and on public safety?
No, I don't. I think that, we saw that a number of those searches came previously from marijuana, and that is no longer a rationale for a stop, or excuse me, for an additional search or investigation. And no, I don't think that we have seen anything demonstrably impactful with that insofar as public safety is concerned.
I don't know if this question is one which is even relevant in this conversation, but are BPD's canines trained to hit on things other than marijuana? Or are they still trained on marijuana?
I mean, one of the dogs is trained after marijuana, and so probably does not hit on marijuana. The other dog was trained before. I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Do I have any further questions for Chief Murad regarding the traffic report? I'm not seeing any. Which moves us on to agenda item number 7, the arrest data report. And it looks like we have Brian Lowe just joined us here from the City of Burlington's Chief Innovation Officer. And looks like we already have Nancy as well too. So I'll let y'all take it away.
Hey, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think I'd like to start by saying, thank you to Chief Murad, Chief Morrison, and Nancy Stetson for providing a great deal of data to us as we did this analysis. This is a report that comes out of the 2019 equity report, and we have a short slide deck, knowing that you guys have a pretty extensive agenda. I think we're item 7 on 16, so we have a fairly short presentation to walk you through the memorandum that you received, I believe, on Friday. Nancy, if you don't mind running the slides and starting up there at number 1. Thank you. And do you mind going over to the second slide? So this is a report that comes out of some analysis done in the 2019 equity report. We're going to focus our presentation on the trend over time of arrests in Burlington, and we're going to look at specific variables that we reviewed that we thought might be of interest to the Commission. We do expect that there may be questions and additional analysis that we need to do coming out of this meeting. Next slide, Nancy. So if you look at arrest rates in Burlington currently, and you normalize those, so per 1,000 of population, in Burlington, if you are Black in Burlington, relative to if you're white, the ratio of arrests is about 3.7 to 1 using 2019 data. There's some information on that slide there that shows you the national comparison and the Vermont comparison. So about 2 to 1 nationally, 5 to 1 in the state. This is using data that the police department previously released in 2018 as part of their use of force analysis. Another important way to think about this same data, and it's a statistic I'll use later in the presentation, so I wanted to front it now, is that there are about 5.3 Black Burlingtonians make up about 5.3% of the population of Burlington and about 17% of the arrests in Burlington. Next slide, please. This slide is just to orient you to the arrest trends over time in Burlington. You can see that in general, while there is some volatility, arrests have fallen between 2012 and 2019. The height is 2016. The lowest arrest year is 2019. When we look a little bit deeper into these numbers, there's a couple things that we found that we think are of interest. In addition to a falling overall arrest rate and a slight reduction in the disparity between Black and white arrests over time, fairly modest reduction in disparity over time, you see that we will see, and we'll speak directly to this, that the disparity rate is higher for Black adults at about 5.0 to 1 than it is for Black juveniles at about 3 to 1. In 2019, and yeah, go ahead, Nancy, you can go to the next slide. In 2019, Black arrestees were particularly overrepresented in 4 crime types. That's drug-related offenses, assault, domestic violence, and disorder-related crimes. And in 2019, arrests for which officers have a higher degree of discretion, which would be low-level nonviolent crimes, show less disparity. So if I can orient you to this slide here, what this is showing is on the y-axis, those variables are categories of arrest type. The blue dotted line represents the demographic portion that Black Burlingtonians make up of the broad Burlington population. The purple dotted line represents the arrest rate overall for Blacks in Burlington of about 17%. So you can see for those top 4 categories, there's a significant overrepresentation of Blacks in Burlington in these arrest types. And I'm happy to take questions as I'm presenting if that's helpful. I defer to the chair on how he wants to, or how you'd like to run the discussion.
I'm okay with people asking questions as we move through this.
Okay. So yeah, please stop me if you have a question. But so the purple dashed line represents the arrest rate of about 17%, and those 4 categories. I know there's a 5th category that's right on the line there, but with noise and data, we aren't sure exactly if it's over or not. A couple other things to flag for the group. It's possible that expungements could play a role in the data that we're reviewing. When an arrest is expunged, the BPD loses that data. We don't know the demographic nature of the expungement. And so it's a possible source of bias built into the data. There are not large numbers of expungements, for example, in the 2019 data, but as you go back in time, the number of expungements can increase. And if that expungement process is correlated in some way, it could lead to inaccuracies or a bias in the data that we're presenting you tonight. We don't know that it is. Some of those expungements are automatic, so it's possible that there is no bias, but I want to make sure you're aware of that, that issue. We also looked at warrants, and about 17% of warrants issued were for Black arrestees in Burlington.
Just ask a quick question. Do you have a raw number about the number of expungements?
I believe, Nancy, I may need you to double check this on me. I think there were either 16 or 19 expungements in 2019, but in 2018, I think that number is higher. I think, I want to say it's in the range of 44 to 52. Do you happen to remember offhand, Nancy?
I remember it more as a percentage. I think in 2018, it was higher than that. It was possibly like 13% of total arrests were expunged. But that was lower for 2019.
And that makes sense to us in that expungements would increase over time, in part because certain arrests are expunged on a timeline. So it's a possible source of bias, but we don't know it to be a source of bias. We just want to make sure you're aware.
Understood. Thank you.
And then warrants are roughly about 17% of arrests. Black arrestees represented 17% of warrants were issued for Black arrestees. So another source of potential confounding. Next slide, please, Nancy. So this slide and the following slide should be read together. What this is showing is a focus on drug arrests, which are the arrest rate, if you remember from the prior slide, the arrest type that shows the greatest degree of disparity. So we are looking here over time. So each one of those columns represents a year at total arrest counts. On the left-hand side, you have Blacks in Burlington, on the right-hand side, whites, and counts by type of arrest. Generally, arrests that are related to sale are more severe than arrests that are related to possession. And so this is the count. And Nancy, do you mind flipping down? And then I might ask you to go back and forth. Thank you for doing this. This is the same data represented on a percentage basis. So here, why we wanted to show both of these in concert. In the percentage slide, it's easier to see visually, basically two things. First, Blacks in Burlington, when arrested for drug-related reasons, tend to be arrested for charges that are related to sale and are therefore more severe than whites. And second, lower-level offenses where officers have more discretion show less disparity. And for example, low-level drug arrests in other communities have been an area of focus. It does not appear to be as much of an issue in Burlington. I recognize that obviously things have changed about how marijuana is regulated in recent years, but because this data goes back to 2012, we thought it was worth showing to the commission.
Are you classifying some of those drugs as low level and others as non?
Some are, and I think it's a great question. Some of the, and I'm not sure how easy it is for you guys to see the key on the right-hand side of the slide that explains which drug and whether it's a possession charge or a sale charge. But for example, one of the things about the slide that I think can be a little bit confusing is that methamphetamines are low and are kind of a bluish color. Marijuana is green. Marijuana would be the lower level drug relative to fentanyl, heroin, or I believe methamphetamines. But I should defer on that to Nancy or to the chiefs who are on the call if there's an error in what I'm saying.
And then I'm sorry, is low level, is that just a step category or is that a gradation? Are you saying that there are lower levels and higher levels?
Great question. I'll tell you what I believe it is, but I think I should defer to the chiefs or Nancy on this. Certain drugs are regulated by certain categories, and so those categories speak to the severity of either possessing or selling the drug. Chief Murad, I think I should defer to you on that.
So there are differences between, and again, marijuana, for example, is not, in these categories anymore. But there were differences. I think that nationally, everyone knows the federal law had disparities between cocaine and crack cocaine or rock cocaine, and so there are differences in those with regard to enforcement. There's certainly differences that we see with regard to what damage is being done to a community by a given kind of drug and trafficking in that given kind of drug. I think that obviously over the past several years, fentanyl has been something that has been tremendously destructive, and we have been seeking a plethora of ways to address it. And enforcement is not the only one. It's probably not even the most important one, especially when you look at the great success that this city has had with the CompStat model, under Mayor Weinberger and Chief Del Pozo and Jackie Corbally and others, and a huge number of stakeholders from the hospital to the government to nonprofit organizations. So they choose to take a look at this particular one because it was causing deaths. There's a reason we call it an epidemic. With regard to the law, no. Some of what the language is here is sort of is a shorthand for what we consider to be stops that have import or not. I also deferred to Deputy Chief Sullivan, who worked narcotics and can fill in a little bit of the thought process there for the differences between these drugs. Matt?
Yes, I'd just add that as far as enforcement goes, sale is always considered more serious than possession.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I'm just, in part, I'm just trying to make sense of these two slides. I'm not sure that the visualization, the data visualization actually helps support the claim, but I'm trying to make sense of the claim in the first place. So the claim uses this concept of low-level drug arrest. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding how that particular concept is being employed on these two slides based on the legend that I have on the right there. It's not clear to me how it works. So that helps a little bit, but I'm still a little, okay.
So, I mean, I would say, first of all, these slides there's a lot of color going on. There's a lot of information going on. What it's showing or not is up for debate. But what I do see in this is a drastic change and you can see it in both this one, which is percentages, which I like the other one better. I think the one that shows numbers and is a little bit more informative insofar as putting into context the amounts of drugs we're talking about, but the number of arrests that we're talking about. But what you see is a disappearance of these of other kinds of arrests of marijuana. Methamphetamine is something that has been routinely discussed amongst law enforcement and at the CompStat level as something that we're worried about being on the horizon. Our daily drug report does in fact show a slight uptick in it, but its ends are very small. And have remained low, thankfully. Nobody wants to see the kind of methamphetamine epidemic that the Midwest and parts of the South and the Southwest saw in the 2000s. But what we have seen is we've seen Vermont being as susceptible or more to the opioid epidemic starting up in the late 2000s and into the 2010s. And really cresting. And I think that this enforcement shows that was pursued vigorously with regard to drug arrests. And it was pursued in a way that a lot of these are drug arrests from investigations. This is not people catching someone using a needle on the street and arresting that person because they saw them using a needle behind a Dunkin' Donuts. This is arrests that come from investigations. These are arrests that come from finding individuals who are selling and trafficking. And I think that this does show a real focus, an overall decrease as frankly this city has made great strides and this county has made great strides in fighting this epidemic, but also a change in the ratio between other kinds of arrests and focusing in where the real harm is happening and dealing with the enforcement part, which as I said is not the largest part of a comprehensive effort to help and defeat the opioid epidemic.
Maybe just one other comment there, and then I'll stop, just to make sure I'm responding to Commissioner Harp's question as well. One of the things we were curious about when we began this analysis was, if you look at other communities across the United States, you'd expect to see arrests grouped under weapons charges, drug charges, and low-level drug offenses. There are too few weapons charges in Burlington to draw any kind of conclusion. There's just very, very few weapons-related charges. The drug charges show those two trends. They do not show high numbers of low-level drug arrests among Black Burlingtonians. They do show more severe arrests among that population. What conclusion to draw from that, I don't know. But it was different than what we might have expected.
Last question on this, then, just to help me. So then, cocaine possession, an arrest for cocaine possession, is that a low-level drug arrest?
Can I speak to this a little bit? So when I was thinking of this, I think of it as possession is lower than sale, and marijuana basically is lower level than all the other drugs. So there's not like one set hierarchy, but it's more like a general idea of less serious and more serious arrests. And I think Brian mentioned we were basing this off of some research in other locations that found that these like drug possession charges were overwhelmingly Black. And we wanted to see if that was true here too.
So
It was not.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Hart?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, there could be additional data that doesn't pertain to BPD, that's Burlington data, correct? If we have DEA arrests, for example, we wouldn't see that. Is that true? Or I'm just trying to understand if there are federal drug crimes where it's the DEA. Is that, do we know, is that completely separate data? Does it ever overlap? Have we looked at that data versus this data for Burlington?
I'd add the county as well as the state in that as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said I would also add, county arrests by the sheriff's department, state arrests by the state police. I'd be curious, Brian, if those numbers are captured.
So I believe the answer to the federal question is yes. We looked also at the NIBRS database, which is the national, I should not try and name the acronym, but it is a FBI maintained database of arrests. And I think Nancy did a lot of work to make sure that as we looked at the Burlington Valcor numbers, which is the name of the Burlington database, that those were cross-referenced into NIBRS accurately. Nancy, is there more that you want to say to that piece?
I don't know about DEA arrests. I mean, maybe Murad would know more. If a Burlington officer makes the arrest, it would count in our data. If the case turns federal, it's still in our database. But I'm not sure if they make arrests independently of local agencies.
And as to the county question, before Chief Murad responds, as to the county question, I don't know the answer to that question. So I don't know if county data appears in our city data.
I can speak to that to some extent, and I would say that the numbers would be extremely low as far as any federal agency goes.
Okay.
But it's possible that they would exist outside of this. They would not be reflected necessarily in our CAT RMS system.
Hey, Brian, there's a lot of good stuff in here. So I'm wondering, is there something I've looked through the packet a couple of times. I'm looking for that breakout that shows us the numbers in these crimes as we're looking at drug crimes, because somebody told us a long time ago that drugs are really bad. This is the most important thing we could be looking at, instead of sex crimes or something like that. But that's another conversation. So I'm wondering, are there numbers that depict the total volume? Because what this looks like to me is there could be a way to talk about how across this, because we know that, what is it, about 5.6% African Americans are in the city or something like that, Brian?
We think about 5.3, so yes. 5.3.
So what that means is that in terms of the numbers, and this means the response, this is what I'm curious about, because this is talking about the resources that are being allocated to this in terms of how we're policing, and also the time that's being put into it. But the raw numbers of, I'd like to see how many people does this actually represent, or how many offenses does this actually represent across that population. Do you see where I'm going? And then also, I guess this is more of a Nancy question. And the same thing with those, are these, help me understand that. Maybe I'm looking at it and don't even know it, Nancy.
Can I answer your first question first?
Please.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Because I just wanted to point out on this graph, there's both the percent at the end, but the little number on the bar is how many arrests there are. So we're talking about 19 arrests of Black people for drugs in 2019. So, and then I guess, so what, like 60 arrests of white people, 50 arrests of white people. So is that what you're trying to get at?
You nailed it. Thank you.
And all these charts are in the document that we distributed to you all on Friday.
I wonder also, the next slide might be helpful if we jumped past the drug arrest focus. You've seen some data like this before in the use of force report from 2018, but what this is showing is as the type of police interaction changes, the type of disparity and the level of disparity fluctuates. And so, you know, in some cases you're looking at relatively small numbers, like Nancy pointed out, to 19 in the drug category. And, you know, for example, use of force incidents, it's a very small number. However, there is a disparity here. And so this also speaks, I think, to what Commissioner Hughes was asking about in terms of kind of in broad strokes, here's where the disparity can be seen visually. Nancy, do you mind going to the next slide unless there's questions there? So here, I think the caution about small numbers is particularly important when it comes to arrests for juveniles, and I'll speak to some of that specifically, but 2 more slides for me, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Nancy for the final couple slides. Here you see adult arrest rates fluctuate somewhat between 2012 and 2019, but are roughly stable at about an arrest ratio of about 5 to 1. You see a marked decline in juvenile arrests over time in Burlington from a rate of roughly 5 to 1 to much closer to parity. But I think there are 2 kind of notes of caution as we're looking at this data. Again, like I can't really draw conclusions, but I do think it is important to recognize that, for example, expungements may factor in here in a way that we don't fully understand. And the numbers are relatively small. In 2019, for example, there were about 23 Black juveniles arrested, or 23 Black youth, and 34 white youth arrested. So you are talking about relatively small numbers here, where an increase of 10 could really change the rate and the ratio that we're looking at.
So if I may, Brian, I'm going to interject and say that there is a conclusion to be drawn with regard to the juveniles, and that is that decrease coincides with the creation of the MOU that stratified, that guided and put new parameters on the role of the SRO in the school. And the change in the way in which arrests occur in the school, the prioritization of engagement and education and alternatives over enforcement, and of having officers in the school who know the individuals with whom they are dealing, who have understandings of the backstories and the dynamics in ways that allow them to do something other than merely respond when called and take the most obvious route, which is the route of enforcement, is the reason for that decrease in the schools. It is the presence of the SROs in a delineated, specific way as determined by that MOU that makes certain that they are changing the way they interact with juveniles in the schools, and that ripples out to the way that officers on the road deal with juveniles who are encountered outside of school.
Nancy, do you want to take the next 2 slides on and sorry, there's one more on juvenile. This is the same data by rate instead of so it's showing very similar information. Adults on the left hand side, youth on the right. Nancy, I think we should go, just from a timing perspective, I think we should go to the city comparison piece. And this is a complicated graph. I think it's important to make sure to share.
Okay, sure. So just to orient you to this graph, each dot is a police agency that sent their arrest data to NIBRS. There's around 2,000 cities represented here. It's like a nationwide data set. On the it's comparing the Black arrest rate to the white arrest rate for each city. So the farther out on each axis you get, the more a agency arrests people compared to their population, either for Black or white people. The lines, the reference lines on the chart show you sort of the level of disparity of those arrest rates. So a city that is sitting right on that black line towards the bottom arrests white and Black people proportionate to their populations. The 2 purple lines show where Burlington sits. One is for 2018, one is for 2019. So a city that sits on that line arrests white and Black people in the same proportions as Burlington does. You can see that Burlington has a similar disparity ratio as Charlottesville, and Burlington also arrests fewer people per capita than a lot of these comparison cities. And these are just a handful of cities we thought to compare ourselves to, cities we consider peer cities. So the other thing to note is that every city, every dot that's above that black line arrests Black people disproportionately to white people. Depending on how far above and to the left they are is how disproportionate it is. Are there any questions on this graph? No. The next one, it shows the exact same data, just laid out by that arrest rate ratio. So it's the disparity between the Black arrest rate and the white arrest rate. The black line shows where cities are concentrated. So you can see that most cities have a disparity ratio of around 2 to 1, which makes sense because the national average is around 2 to 1 for this ratio. Burlington is a bit higher than that, and then you can see where these peer cities line up on that scale. And that's it. Happy to take more questions.
I have a couple more questions, if that's all right, Chair Gamache.
Please go right ahead.
All right, so first, the first is not a question, but a comment, an editorial comment, probably a cheap one. But the last couple of charts just indicating that there are other cities that have worse racial disparities than Burlington is a bit questionable. I think that, look, I'm all in favor of understanding underlying determinants of arrests and crime, things like that. But just saying there are cities that do it worse is not particularly reassuring. That being said, so the question, actually, so that was a comment. The question is, with respect to you, so one of the claims that's being made, at least implicitly, is that officers have less discretion with respect to more violent crimes like violent felonies. And so I was wondering whether you had any sort of comparison or any kind of evaluation in this data set of charges that were made upon arrest that were not, that the state's attorney did not choose to pursue charges for, as perhaps an indicator that those arrests were either unfounded or not done correctly.
I only get the charges that are in the police database, I would say. So I don't have information on that, what the state's attorney decides.
Is there any ability to cross-reference this data with data that the state's attorney might be able to put out about kind of how cases progress through their system?
I have seen very little court data on this scale, like incident level court data, like sort of arrest by arrest. I would love to work with that data and compare it to what we have, but that's not something I've seen.
And then this is, I guess, the broader question for Chief Murad, perhaps. So does Burlington have a sense of what sorts of arrests, of kind of the number of arrests that are basically not pursued by the state's attorney, or especially with respect to more serious arrests like violent felonies?
We have a sense. Our sense is that there are too many. We think that too many of the cases, when an officer puts work in to a case that involves a complainant and witnesses and investigation and puts that into an affidavit and sends it up to have it returned or in some cases diverted. There are instances in which diversion is appropriate. And we love working with the partners at CJC. And there are instances in which we don't feel that that's appropriate. COVID has changed the dynamics of that a great deal. COVID-19 has really had the courts prioritize what they're putting through or not. The state's attorney has made no bones about the fact that there are cases that are being dismissed owing to the stresses on the court, and frankly, the potential for is this crime worthy of having any kind of lodging time, owing to the fact that lodging carries with it different kinds of risks now owing to COVID-19. And those are decisions that are made by the state's attorney, sometimes by the Department of Correction, sometimes by the court. But insofar as being able to sort of track the through line on that, there's no easy data way to do it. That would be a pretty laborious task. It's one in which I'd be interested, but it's not one in which I have resources to devote insofar as digging into that thread. What I can do is we could look at the cases as officers take them, and ask whether or not there are differences that can be seen by observers. The affidavits of certainly, for example, the assault cases are all public, and people can look at those affidavits and decide for themselves which of those cases ought not to have been pursued, which of those are instances in which there was there something done here that made an officer, that an officer said this was an aggravated when it couldn't have been or shouldn't have been, or that it was not an aggravated, it was a simple assault and perhaps it should have been an aggravated assault, and is there something else playing into those officer decisions? We have not seen that, and that's one of the things that we wanted to look at when we see these kinds of disparities. These disparities are concerning, and we want to get to the heart of these and understand where we are able to impact them. We've seen the ability to impact disparities in traffic enforcement, and we've seen that change. Can we make a difference with regard to some of these kinds of crimes that we're seeing right now in this report? And that's the next step. But I think that with regard to, for example, assaults, you have a victim, you have an act. This isn't an officer discretion issue with deciding to make an arrest or not. And so how we work on trying to address some of these things is important. But again, we have seen in the schools that there has been a remarkable change made by officers who are embedded there and working with the students on a day-to-day basis and with the teachers and understanding things that are able to make different kinds of decisions about whether or not an act in front of them constitutes a crime or is something that we can address in a different way.
Yes, and thank you. So suppose someone had the following hypothesis, right? Suppose someone said, first, there is discretion among officer arrests even for things like violent felonies. The officers have to essentially decide how serious of a violation it is, and the hypothesis is Black individuals are more frequently arrested for in the category of violent felonies than other people are, and those arrests are often not sustained by the state's attorney. So that's an hypothesis that someone has. Is there anything in this data set that would allow us to evaluate that hypothesis?
Not in this data set, no, because we don't have access to, to correlate these cases specifically with the outcome at the level of the state's attorney.
Okay, thank you.
Can I speak to that to some extent, Commissioner Hart? Just as far as process goes, whenever there's a serious crime or a higher level crime, a felonious crime, if you will, and we're going to try to lodge somebody, we would make that arrest, we would bring them back here, we would write an affidavit, we would send that over to the state's attorney who is on call for review. The state's attorney would review that affidavit for probable cause. Before this individual is placed in jail, they would also consult with a judge who would also give this judicial review, and then who would place conditions on that individual and agree that they should be lodged. So it's not just the officer making this decision, it's the state's attorney's office, and it's a judge also weighing in on the decision to lodge somebody.
Thank you. So if they don't agree to the lodging, that would not show up in our arrest numbers?
It may still show up as an arrest, because what they would say is release the person on conditions, or they would say issue them a citation and let them walk out the door. So it would still show up as an arrest. Now it's a matter of semantics to some extent. It's not an arrest, a lodging in Vermont versus a citation where you're just issuing them an invitation to appear in court at a later date. But the reality is it's still criminal charges.
But
sorry, can I just
mind that not all of this data includes an arrest. Some of this data these are incidents that occurred and are, certainly if there's race, then that's because there is a suspect. But it's not necessarily the occurrence of incidents isn't always an arrest, although this is an arrest report. But not all the data has arrests.
And can I just clarify that this arrest data includes citations? So it includes both people who are lodged, which is a small number, and people who are cited to return to court later. Those are all counted as arrests in our database.
I wanted to just add into that. And thanks for that, Nancy. That's an important difference there. I think you guys call that Rule 3, discretion. I think the data that you're looking for, that the Commissioner Harp is looking for, would be in the state's attorney's office. Is all I was going to say. And so they have another database. They have another system up there. But all of this stuff that is going over from the police department is ending up in Sarah's office. And we've already began, in my other life, we've already began to start those conversations with her to find those high discretion points, high impact, high discretion points in the state's attorney's office, a lot of them outlined in H284, to begin the process of gathering those kind of data that Commissioner Harp was referring to. I'd also say that one of the things that's not really, maybe that might not be completely coming out of this conversation is that it's the charge that's really important. So, you can arrest somebody all day long, but at the end of the day, it's the charge that is what makes it stick. So, and I think John expressed his frustration where there's things that are being turned around or diverted. Again, that's discretion. At the state's attorney's office, they can charge, they can dismiss, they can divert. There's a lot of latitude. In fact, they have much more discretion than these folks down here. That's all I have.
I had one question of clarification. I just didn't quite understand this. I think it was figure 7. You didn't show it on this presentation here, but the ratio of arrests to arrestees. And could you just further explain that those numbers to me just a little bit more? I didn't quite grasp those. There we go.
Go ahead, Nancy.
So this is just, this is showing, it's trying to figure out whether people are Black people are arrested more often in a given year. So this is saying, on average, how many times was each unique arrestee arrested in each year? So you can see that both Black and white arrestees in 2019 were arrested about 1.5 times. You can't be arrested a half a time, but on average, that's how many times they're arrested. Does that help?
Yeah, because we were concerned that we might be seeing 1 or 2 individuals arrested many, many times, and that could throw off the data in a way that could be misleading, and it does not appear that that's the case.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that. Thank you.
But it is worth noting that because we have a more than 1-to-1 ratio, we are, the people who commit crime in our community are the people who then commit crime in our community. They commit, they are recidivists. And the bulk of crimes are, we see some people do it once and never cross our radar again. That's not the norm. We have a lot of people who are routine, they're victims one day, they are perpetrators another day, they are persons of interest in a call, they are callers or witnesses, but it is, a lot of what we see with regard to low-level disorder, but also disorder that sometimes metastasizes into more violent assaults and felony assaults, is a cohort of folks who have recurring engagements with police.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that in principle, but 1.65 doesn't really. Sorry, 1.65 doesn't really suggest that level of recidivism, I would think.
I'd add that all of this is framed in what we've identified as being crime, and what crimes we identify as being important, and where we choose to police those crimes. And I think that at some point or another, we need some kind of redefinition. This whole idea about this war on drugs is not working, and it it has, all the way back to 1850, crimes have been constructed and policing has been conducted, and folks have been policed in very specific ways. So I appreciate this. It has given me some new perspective and also has reaffirmed a lot of my thoughts. And I think it's great work, Ryan. I've never really seen anything to this detail, Nancy. Much appreciated.
So I do like the recommendations that the report makes. Is there any plan on implementation for those recommendations?
We are definitely looking for the commission's feedback on those. If there are, if there are elements of additional data that we should pursue, if there are points about those recommendations that the commission thinks are valuable, we'd like to take that back with us. There could be other data sets that we should be looking for as well. I think that's quite helpful to hear those thoughts from the state's attorney perspective. And I've also been considering just the Community Justice Center also has a data set about court diversion that might be interesting to explore as well. But feedback will be welcome here on those recommendations or on other areas of focus.
I just had one question that I was asking earlier when I read this on Friday. And I think it's already been answered, listening to Commissioner Hughes and a couple other folks, and certainly appreciate the comments. I'm hearing that there's not data available to correlate this with convictions. Is that correct?
No, sorry.
No, go ahead, Nancy.
So can you correlate this with, like we're looking at arrest rates, how many of these people got convicted?
I dream of having complete data sets from the state's attorney and from Department of Corrections, but I haven't seen anything like that.
Yeah. And we're talking about policing here, so that really just kind of takes it in a different direction. But I'm thinking that I heard that, and that is what I heard. That is not available.
Yeah.
So, Commissioner, it's not. I would love it if it were. I've seen these wonderful graphs that show every electron of energy generated in the country, where it comes from, whether it's nuclear or coal or oil or hydro, and how it goes into different sectors, whether those sectors are residential or commercial, or if they are, if that energy is going into transportation. I would love if we could do that. And it also shows all the bleed off, all the energy that we lose during both transmission and then over creation of energy, et cetera. So could we do that with this? Yes, but it's 3 steps, because you've added another step now by talking about convictions. That goes past the state's attorney. And the state's attorney, as Commissioner Hughes mentioned, has a huge amount of discretion and routinely takes a large number of cases that are given against an individual and bundles them into something. So is that an indication that there's, you've got multiple arrests that turn into one case? Sometimes with all those charges and sometimes not. Sometimes some of those charges are sort of held in abeyance. They're still available to be used, but they're not going to add those charges in because we're focusing on this one in front of us instead. And then you've got to take that to the next level, which is actually get it to a conviction, whether that's a plea, whether that's actually a trial. And so, that, as far as I know, would probably, I think the state's attorney might keep track of that as well, but I'm not entirely sure. That may actually be a purview of the court. So, following all the way through in that way would be really fascinating. It would be a lot of work. It would involve far more than just the police. And it's not something that we can do by fiat here in the BPD or at the city level, as Brian has done with all of this data here. But it would be worthwhile. I think that, you've hit on something really, really attractive as an ideal.
I want to just
county has that data set, and so if we're looking, I think we should be pushing for the sort of data collection that places like Cook County do to track that all the way from arrest through the court system as well. Through discretionary judgments by the state's attorney and also by the county attorney and also through the courts. So there is a model, and I think we should push for it. With the other partners in the city and state.
I would agree what John was saying, and just definitely lift that up because he's on to something. I'm not interested in all those molecules and energy and all that other crazy stuff. That's just mind blowing, John. But I think the the system, you know, what we know is that there, you know, at any given time, there's 9 to 10 or 11% of the prison population is Black folks. And ever since we've been doing this work, everybody's been pointing at each other. Now, there is the racial disparities in the criminal and juvenile justice system advisory panel, which we got created in 2017, that I would encourage folks to try to pop in on, since we can do it from home now, and check in with them, because every representative, John didn't talk about judges, he didn't talk about corrections, he didn't, you know, go down the whole line, you know, where folks are, you know, coming back in for violations in the whole 9 yards. So there's a lot of moving parts to it, but every single one of those folks, to include DCF, are sitting at the table on a monthly basis. And so, you know, I think we could kind of start trying to push them on that.
I had one comment on at the end there for data limitations. Is it possible to, I guess, maybe keep some of the data of the expungements so as not to inadvertently bias some of these numbers? Or once it's expunged, it's just all gone?
So I'm not 100% clear on expungements. Sometimes the charge is still there, but the race, like any personal identifying information, has gone. And I don't know the statute around what has to happen. So usually you can still see the charge and like the time of arrest, but not the name, not anything to do with the person.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, can that information then be recovered through information that BPD possesses?
I don't believe so. I think it might be complicated for the BPD to retain information that's been expunged. Like it might create.
No, yeah, we cannot retain that information.
Thank you.
No. But that doesn't mean that at a different level it might not be possible. I don't know what happens above the city level.
Right. I mean, I would, for the general point, I'd actually kind of encourage us to not. I mean, just understand that that's a possible confine, but not worry about trying to extract the data from the expungements about whether it might be confounding the data, because I think it's just, you know, in principle, I think let the expunged data go. Don't worry about it at all. But yeah, but okay, thank you.
All right, I'm conscious. I feel like we're taking up too much of the commission's time in a way here. We have these kind of 3 recommendations. It seems like we have some general consensus from commissioners or no objections to us continuing to explore those different recommendations. And I think we would take that unless you direct us differently.
Mr. Chair, can we have Brian and Nancy come back next month? Can we consider just having them come back, and maybe we can process some of this, and maybe we can all be in a place where we can revisit it. I really appreciate the work that you've done, and I don't want it to seem like I'm being dismissive at all. I really would like to follow up on this.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys feel shortchanged by this presentation, if you want to come back, I'd be more than happy to have you guys come back and finish this up.
I don't think we should feel shortchanged. I just want to make sure that if there's a direction coming from the commission, that we don't miss it. You know what I mean? Like I want to make sure if there's follow-up that you're requesting that we're working on. Mm-hmm. And if it's helpful, we're happy. I think Nancy, I don't want to speak for him. I think we'd be happy to come back if that's helpful to the commission at some point.
Yes, happy to be here.
So I mean, I'd be happy to have you guys come back, but at the same time, I also feel like if you have any questions or deep dives, I think I'm comfortable emailing you. I think any commissioner here is comfortable emailing you guys any further direction. So I'm more comfortable going with that route personally.
Sounds good. We are definitely available if needed. Otherwise, we'll sit tight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right. Moving on the agenda, item number 8 is wellness. And this was.
We're going to defer that one based upon our previous conversation.
All right, then. Moving on to agenda number 9, President Obama's final report on 21st century policing. This was tabled from
things that are on the agenda right now, and I mean, I had something prepared to kind of go over and just maybe lead into pillar number 1, but you know, I'd be happy just to take this off the agenda for tonight so we can move forward.
Is that a motion to table this till next meeting? I'm here.
Didn't quite get to a motion. I just
Oh, sorry.
I would just say,
sorry.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
would you, I was very interested in this item and wondered, just for new people, if you would share anything that you had prior to the next meeting so we could take it into consideration.
I'm happy to do it. Whatever the commission decides would like me to do right now, I can maybe just do something for 10 minutes or 5 or 10 minutes right now, or we can just table this whole thing and come back to it, or I can update you, just send the deck over to the commission. I'm really just trying to be sensitive to the fact that we're going to probably end up in executive session. Well,
I would love the opportunity to review a deck for what's been worked on to kind of get up to speed of what the discussions have been.
On this particular topic, Commissioner?
Yes.
well,
Yes, I've been listening to a lot of the meetings, but if we, I guess, where are we gone and where are we going?
So the 21st Century Task Force has been on the agenda for, I think, 3 meetings at Commissioner Hughes's desire. We haven't addressed it yet. We haven't really done anything with it.
That being said, you know, and I was already in a full conversation with the chair's permission. I'll go ahead and share with what it is that we have. You can go ahead and take a look at your screens. What you'll see is you'll see the just a little bit, and I'll try to be brief on this. I just created a couple slides and pulled them out of the report itself, the 21st century. The President's final report on 21st century policing was actually, I believe, envisioned around 14 and I think released in 15 under the Obama administration, and largely trying to address some of the challenges that we have with policing across the nation. Trust between law enforcement agencies and people they protect and serve is essential to democracy. So there was this whole conversation. A bunch of folks were pulled in. There was you know, some consideration being taken into what was then being referred to the recent events. There's always recent events. What this report really brought forward, I will share with you, but what I won't do is take the deep dive, at least not tonight. I think I'm just going to scrape across the just one part of it. The executive summary really is, it had all the recommendations in. That's kind of what I'm going to be talking from. But charging the task force to identify best practices and offering those recommendations on how policing practices can promote effective crime reduction while building public trust was what this whole thing was about. So the whole process, there were a number of listening sessions. You know, there was an 11-member task force, over 100 individuals from diverse stakeholder groups, law enforcement officers and executives, community members, civic leaders, advocates, and so forth. And then there was a whole lot of other folks who went in and submitted their written testimony and so forth. There was some recommendations that came out of this, and really they're framed in 6 particular categories. They like to call them pillars. These pillars, and there's this cool graphic that I'll show you maybe next time we're together, but this whole idea of building the legitimacy, police oversight, technology and social media, community policing, crime reduction, officer training and education, and yes, officer safety and wellness, or those 6 pillars that we're going to be talking about. But there were 2 overarching recommendations in addition to those six pillars that you usually don't hear a lot about. And that what the number 1 was, and this is going to sound a little familiar based upon the conversation that we just had, is that first of all, the president should support the creation of a national crime and justice task force to examine all areas of the criminal justice and propose reform. So that, you know, immediately they were already talking about looking beyond policing, you know, policing because it's like that tip of the arrow, you know, of the so-called criminal justice system, and law enforcement happens to have the opportunity and the pleasure to be in contact with everybody, makes them so much different. But it was already, I was identified during this process that, yeah, you know, we definitely need to be looking beyond policing when we talk about data in the State House, and we talk about so-called criminal justice reform, like the Justice Reinvestment Act that just moved, or S219 that just moved into State House with use of force. Quite often I try to remind folks, hey, give the police a break because, you know, they're doing it better than anybody else in the entire system in terms of data collection, policy, training. So it's very important to understand that broader picture. The second one is as a corollary to the effort, the task force, they also recommend that the president support programs that take comprehensive and an inclusive look at community-based initiatives. Really, really important, because even during that time, they were already talking about the fact that, wait a minute, we got to probably take some things off of police plate because they're probably doing too much. You know, police are doing everything except for taking the garbage out, and sometimes they're doing that as well. Let's take a look and see, you know, what else is going on here, addressing core issues such as poverty, education, health and safety, those things also that are underlying issues that feed into these challenges of policing. So that was a process in a nutshell. And what we're going to talk about very briefly tonight, so we can get right back on, is talk about building trust and legitimacy. Building trust and legitimacy. You know, and I just, you know, I'll go back, you know, to that previous, you got to understand, frame this. Remember in 2014, the world was falling apart. Michael Brown, you know, then you had Trayvon Martin had just happened. It went on and on. In fact, it's still going on. But remember in 2016, it really got bad. But this was, you know, what we know is in our communities of color across the United States, what are there, 18,000 police agencies across the state, across the United States. What we know and understand in communities across the United States is yes, there is a dilapidated trust that exists between law enforcement and communities of color, and those are disempowered communities. That's the way it is. There are a lot of things that feed into that. What this is this is that first principle, and this is talking about how do we go about building the trust that's required, and why do we speak in terms of legitimacy? We'll talk about that here in just a second. So building trust and nurturing legitimacy on both sides, it's a foundational principle. Underlying the nature of relations between law enforcement agencies and communities they serve. Now, these two points right here, I think, are really what's taken us into those principles. These are kind of like those, I should say, those recommendations. But the two principles are decades of research and practice support the premise that people are more likely to obey the law when they believe that those who are enforcing it have authority that is perceived as legitimate by those subject to the authority. So, you know, if there's a perception in the community that the law enforcement agency is run amok, or it is just out of control, or they're just, you know, off the chain and there's no accountability, or that they're hurting people or they're killing people and it's with impunity, or fill in the blank, then obviously you're going to have folks in the community, or else just take a step back from that. If you are a child, or even if you're a man, where every single time a law enforcement officer showed up at your house, it never ended well, ever. When you have communities where men have been siphoned out of these communities and they're, you know, currently incarcerated, you know, for generations, and economically, there's challenges in the community. And every time you see a cop, it's bad news. At some point or another, you begin to question whether you should even call them. So there's some real issues in terms of trust, across the United States, departments across the United States, and yes, the Burlington Police Department as well. So the public confers legitimacy only on those whom they believe are acting in procedurally just ways. In addition, law enforcement cannot build community trust if it is seen as an occupying force coming in from the outside to impose control of the community. So these are the thoughts, these are the principles that were established by this whole group of folks, led by really some reputable folks. I can run some names off, but in the Chiefs of Police Association and many other folks were involved in this. But these were the principles upon which they built these recommendations. These are, just give you these seven recommendations, and then we'll get out of here. Number one, and I'll just read them. Law enforcement culture should embrace a guardian rather than a warrior mindset to build trust and legitimacy, both within agencies and with the public. Number two, adopt procedural justice as a guiding principle for internal and external policies and practices to guide their interactions with rank and file officers and with the citizens they serve. Number three, establish a culture of transparency and accountability to build public trust and legitimacy. Number four, proactively promote public trust by initiating positive non-enforcement activities to engage communities that typically have high rates of investigative and enforcement involvement with government agencies. Track and analyze the level of trust communities have in police, just as they measure changes in crime. And the last one is strive to create a workforce that encompasses a broad range of diversity, including race, gender, language, life experience, and cultural background to improve understanding and effectiveness in dealing with all communities. So that's pillar number one. I thought at the time that, I brought this to the attention of the commission, and I know the mayor really embraces this. I think the former chief was somewhat of a fan, but I don't know for sure. This is really just to kind of feed into, if you will, some of the conversations that we're having, and some of us are new to some of this work that we are doing. These challenges are not new. I thought that if we just had an ongoing conversation to where maybe on a regular basis we could just return to these 6 pillars, and maybe next month I'll give you pillar number 2, and we can talk more about. We can engage in a brief conversation if it seems appropriate to the chair, and then maybe this might help us just to move the work forward. And that's all I have, and I'm open to any. Well, actually, I just want to yield back to the chair.
Sorry. Chief Murad first.
Yeah, so that's a great synopsis of the first pillar, Mark. I have the PDF of the document, which those slides were all cut from, and the language there is a terrific synopsis of the language that's in that description of the first pillar. The 6 pillars, just the recommendations alone go on for about 6 pages or 8 pages in 12-point font, all of the different kinds of recommendations. It is something that this agency has embraced for a long time. Deputy Chief Sullivan will tell you that, it is a part of our promotional tests. Chairman Gamache was part of our promotional exams, and it is something that comes up in those promotional interviews, discussions of the 21st Century Task Force, and those pillars and knowledge of them. And they're very important to us. I really appreciate that Chairman Hughes mentioned the idea of initiating positive non-enforcement activities. I mean, that's exactly what Creamy with a Cop was. And we're looking to find funding for that again, since it was removed as a line item budget removal by the City Council, to try to find ways to work with the Queen City Police Foundation or others in order to get those kinds of opportunities. So these are really terrific ways for agencies to embrace those notions. I think that one of the things now is that, where those notions get us insofar as developing agencies in this moment, because some of the things that they requested were actually seen in the reaction to the murder of George Floyd. I mean, a very swift, immediate firing, a reaction by the prosecutorial system to immediately put down charges, and a release of information around those. So I think there's more that people want, even beyond these. But these pillars are indeed a place to start. We've been working on them for quite a while.
I think I saw Commissioner Grant's hand up.
Yes. Part of my interest in joining the commission is that I have definitely felt a lack of communication. So when we were talking earlier about the figures and the different incidents and the wide variety of incidents that our officers deal with on a regular basis, and how that could be better communicated. So communication overall is, as we continue to have these discussions, Cream with the Cop, it was cute, but it wasn't, what's the word I want? I know we're on the Committee for Policing Policies. We talked about more substantial communication between the police department and the community that would really address the trust issues, the lack of trust issues that are there. So hopefully that we will continue to see that as an ongoing conversation. That would be one of the goals that I would like us to see addressed. Whether in this, currently the way the situation is now, more Zoom meetings that are open for public engagement, beyond the commission meetings and the public forum, but something where people can really talk about their feelings, exchange their feelings about their encounters or about their perceptions, because perception is reality for a whole variety of reasons. So I just wanted to throw that out there for now. Thank you.
Can I just go back to that? I had stepped away just for a moment. I apologize, but I just want to go back to that. And John, thanks for chiming in and all that. I just want to go back to that the discussion about there's this whole thing about this bullet here. I think it is bullet number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Proactively promote public trust by initiating positive non-enforcement activities to engage communities that typically have high rates of investigative and enforcement involvement with government agencies. And there are a number of different things that have come out of that across the United States in different departments and so forth. And yeah, I think that the main reason why I thought it'd be a good idea for us to do this is for this very reason, is because I want the commissioners, I want to make sure that we as commissioners, what we're doing is we're looking at something that's framing this thing that we're working within, that we're looking at something that is well thought out. You notice though in that communication, in that bullet, they didn't talk about just having something for the general community or the privileged community or the community that has a car or whatever. They talked about that disproportionately impacted community, and that ain't no Creamy with a Cop, John. That's something else. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together. But it's something else, respectfully. So I just want to make sure, just speaking to the commissioner's point, there is a place for Creamy with a Cop. Don't get me wrong. I like Creamy with a Cop. Okay. But I think we got to have, we'll talk, I don't want to take too much air out of the room. And I know we got a whole lot to cover. I tried to avoid this conversation, but I just want to emphasize.
It's an important one.
More than anything, I think these are the kind of conversations I want to have with the commission. These are the kind of things that I want to make sure that we're sharing. And yeah, that document's out there, but nothing replaces having the opportunity for us to kick stuff around like this, and having that space to have the conversations that we need to have as we look into this next century.
Commissioner Hart.
So, right, I had asked also as far as kind of practical things that can be implemented, and I've been asking for this for a little while. I mean, so with respect to the possibility of setting up a longitudinal community survey, which really tries to assess attitudes of the public towards BPD, that can be tracked over a long period of time. It can hopefully help to guide some of the asset allocation decisions that BPD makes. I think that would be a very good thing. I think there's some interest also in the community about having such a thing. So I think that's something that can and should be developed whenever possible, either using kind of outside resources, or can be developed by the commissioners or otherwise in-house, or with researchers at the university or things like that. That's it for me.
I strongly agree with that. I remember completing a survey earlier this year or the end of last year. And I think I'd also mentioned it at the Committee on Policing Policies. I thought it was a pretty poor survey. And I understand that we had a reputable outside organization that helped put it together. But I felt that it didn't do a good job of first of all, it didn't allow enough open-ended questions. It was looking to measure certain interactions that people had, and it didn't have the variety of all the variety of interactions that could have occurred, and then the options that you had to choose, I felt were very not slanted, but just kind of the way they pushed people. Like there wasn't something appropriate, but you had to choose something that was there. So I would love to see a public engagement survey where the commission is really involved in the formation of the questions. I have no problem working with an outside organization, but really to do a test drive. I felt like no one did a test drive of that survey to really take into consideration the wide variety of ways that people could, number one, interact with an officer, and number two, deal with perceptions. Because if you don't fully understand what the perceptions are in the community, whether they're false perceptions or true perceptions, you can't properly deal with them. Thank you.
Commissioner Hart.
Thank you. I wanted to confirm with Commissioner Harp that this is tying in with the special committee's report. Are you tying it in with that recommendation about repairing relationships with the community? Because I know, okay, because you've been really good about trying to go down that list of items that you worked on. So I just wanted to tie it to that what we're talking about is one of the products of the special committee. Where we
asked that as a question, was this one of the products of the special committee? I think we can.
And the recommendation was that that the city hire a consultant skilled in survey techniques, correct? Okay, I just wanted to, I appreciate you're always tying it back towards us, moving towards accomplishing the items on that from the special committee. So thank you.
If we hire a consultant, I just want to say I don't want to see us dependent on that consultant. I like to see us, I know we're all busy, but I'd like to see us do some of the work. Sometimes on the Committee on Special Policies, it was a pet peeve of mine, the constant reference to using money that was offered to the committee to hire a consultant, as if the consultant should be doing all of the work without giving the committee substantial time to look into all the various issues and receive information about the issues. I'm not against a consultant, but I really feel strongly about making sure that there's sufficient input from us and the community, and that it's something that's a survey that's test run. Thank you.
Just to chime in really quickly about that, I think the point, my understanding of the point was just that the role of the consultant was just to ensure that that any survey that was produced was statistically sound and rigorous, does not require that the consultant do all of the work or produce it on their own, but that it be something that for which kind of responsible data can be collected over a long period of time, from which inferences can be done. So right, writing surveys is an art. It's a science. Social science researchers have done it for a long time, and something that I was just make sure that this survey is done well, but it doesn't at all preclude participation from the commission or anyone else.
Can I just say that the other piece of what we're doing here is, well, it's very important that we understand this is programmatic. There's a lot of moving parts here, and so I want to be careful that we don't get out in front of ourselves, because there are 5 other pillars, and there's a lot of other stuff for us to understand about how does this this new resolution and the things that are coming out of that, the June 29th resolution, how does that fold into this? What is our combined strategy with the committee, with the Public Safety Committee, as well as with the obligation that we have to ensure that we're working with the community, that we're tied in at the hip with the community and moving the ship forward. So I think that if we're going to discuss, and from my perspective, I think we're going to discuss things like a public survey or any other moving part. I just want to make sure that we have everything, that we're taking into account, a full perspective of the big picture and understanding how everything is going to work together and have a unified strategic plan to take this thing down the road. So we're working, working at this thing in the right chronological way, that we're prioritizing things in the right way, and that we're we got our eyes on the prize. So that's what I would add about just the whole conversation that goes from 21st century policing to surveying. I think there's more to the conversation.
I'm not entirely sure I understand the suggestion, but I think that the importance of having information about the community's attitudes for the police is, while it's mentioned in the 21st century policing report, it's kind of independent of that. So I think that is work that can be done without needing to wait for kind of the committee, as the police commission as a whole, grappling with all 6 pillars of the recommendations. I mean, again,
I didn't hear the first part of what you just said. Can you say what the first part of what you just said?
I'm not sure what counts as the first part. I'll just summarize it all really quickly. I just think that having reliable information about the community's attitudes towards BPD is valuable, independent of all of the other work that might need to be done with respect to improving policing in Burlington.
Yeah, that may be true. Yeah.
All right then. Okay. Moving on to agenda item number 10, which is the final review of the draft of the role of the commission and oversight. And I'll start up on this one. I know that Shireen had emailed the city attorney's office a couple times over the last couple weeks, and hoping to get them to look at, I believe it was section 3 of the policy. They did not get back to us, but Chief Miara did get back to us earlier on today, stating that they had not reviewed that part yet, and so we're exactly at the same spot as we were last meeting with this, and still waiting on the city attorney to rectify, what was it, the criminal justice
section 3 and CGIS implications with CGIS. Mm-hmm. If I may, Mr. Chair, I guess. Yeah, the city attorney regrets that she can't be here and no one from her office can. It was just one of those things. There was an illness, there was a vacation, and so they were unable to join us. This is something that, we were so close to having it agreed upon at the previous meeting. Now we do have to revisit it. I think there has been some discussion about, at the very least, a need for a release or a signature whenever any kind of data review occurs, an audit trail of some sort, or at least a sort of lending library trail of to whom the data has gone, and that release would have to make note of the legal consequences, including potential personal liability if certain kinds of data are released. And that goes both to CGIS and potentially to personnel type data as well. The language for that is not set. And so obviously we can't vote on something that we're not set on. And I wanted this delivered to you all by Thursday, by end of Friday at the very, very latest. I was mindful of making certain that you'd have at least a full weekend to review it, and giving it to you, later than that wouldn't have been fair, even though we had in fact reviewed it so many times already. And really this it's the one section that we just haven't been able to nail down, but we weren't able to do that. So, and I know that Commissioner Hughes notes that there, may be some overlap between that racial justice resolution from the City Council and this. So we're close to this. It really is just a matter of getting the right legalese into that section and the right form that would be required as a release for the review of certain kinds of information as described in section 3.
And I move that we table this discussion for the next meeting, also with an understanding that since it is still in draft, that the new commissioners have a chance to look at it and provide any suggestions they want to. So the motion is that we table.
And if I may, so Mello, the copy that I sent you is actually, the section that we're talking about was actually changed in the copy that I sent you. So I need to send you the section that the entirety of the body has. Everything else in it is the same. It's just that one section is what I sent to the city attorney, trying to get them to move on correcting that section, or at least working on that section. So I'll send you the one that is what everybody else has. I apologize for that.
Yeah, and it might be, sorry, go ahead, Karen. I was just going to say that it might be helpful to read the May minute meetings, because that's where we talked about this policy last in substance.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if Commissioner Harp would consider pulling off on that motion, just so we can figure out what to do about the language that the chief just alluded to. I think that it's just a matter of figuring out, how we're going to approach, I suppose, that language, because I think the language is let's see, that's not it, but it's here. I just will share it with you. This this language. No, that's not it. Stop sharing. That's not the language. It's this language here. I don't know why I keep pulling up the wrong thing, but the language is from the resolution that was passed. Let me just get rid of that. The language is from the resolution. Oh, there it is. That was passed on the 29th, and it has a direct impact on that. And I'm just wondering, it's not a matter of whether we should approve this this or not. I'm just trying to figure out what to do about it in moving forward. So I'm asking.
Motion was just that we table. I haven't heard a second.
Yeah, I thought there was a motion to table. We're not going to talk about that. Is somebody going to second it, or are we going to just keep talking about it? I'm new, so I just asking the question.
So that's what I'm trying to understand on the motion, though, is if we table it, does that mean that once the city attorney signs off on it, then it's going to come back for our approval?
Yeah, I think Melo
we need a second, and then you can discuss about the motion or what you want to choose to do.
Hold on for a second, sorry.
Thank you.
So
now I think you can have a discussion based on that.
All right, so I'm just concerned about if, maybe we can just agree upon the fact that once this thing is comes out of the city attorney's office, then we'll be able to figure out what to do about this new language, and we'll just leave it like that and move on.
I thought that was implied by tabling it.
I was going to say, it was my understanding that if we table this, it comes out, we'll look through it, make sure it's stuff, and then we vote on it. That's kind of how I thought it was.
What I'm talking about is that the let's see.
Basically, Commissioner Hughes, my suggestion is just let's not talk about it now. Let's talk about when we have some more language.
Talking about
Clear
this
language
language.
to actually discuss.
I don't think Commissioner, I don't think all of us have the same draft either. So it should be tabled until we all have the same draft. I don't think Mello has the same draft.
The same draft of the existing policy.
Well, it's not an existing policy. The same draft of the draft of this role of the commission. Correct. And I know Commissioner Durfee, I'm afraid you don't. And Commissioner Grant, I sent the wrong one to. So what we can do is have Shannon will resend everybody the draft that we were working on last, and that has the yellow. She'll also resend everybody the May minutes, since as Commissioner Hart mentioned, that has sort of the most extant conversation about where we got with this discussion. It will be great to have a city attorney on if we're going to discuss this. So Commissioner Harp, your motion to table makes a lot of sense, because that would allow us to have that attorney present. And then we can, in fact, move forward with it with either proposed draft language or a couple of versions of proposed draft language, or just from a position of everybody being on the same page so that we can address.
Okay.
So I honestly didn't think you need that much discussion, but I'm happy to have it.
No,
I second your motion.
So we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor of tabling this discussion until next meeting, raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
I believe that is unanimous. All right then, moving on to agenda item number 11, discussion of mugshots and their release. So I guess this was mine. And I guess I was just kind of curious of how, is there a policy for when mugshots are released with press releases? And I guess do we need one? And I personally think we kind of do need some more clarity on how we release mugshots to the public, but I'm happy to have a discussion on it with everybody. Sorry, Chief Murad.
So there is no policy, and I think previously it was a decision driven by the chief. The chief would make that determination. The presence of mugshots are if a news agency wants them, they will get them. They're not protected in any way. But the decision, I recently sent out guidance to our media team and to our leadership, lieutenants and sergeants, that we will use them when we are seeking someone, whether that person is being sought for a crime or whether that person is being sought because he or she is missing. And we will otherwise not put them. And by put them, I mean we will not put them into our press release. We will not release them on our social media. We will not put them, inside the document. Are we still going to include them in the release to local media? Yes, because if the local media entities ask for them, we're going to have to do it. And I don't want supervisors to have to wait around and do another step when they're in the middle of other things. When they put the press release out, I don't want another step to have to go that they're going to have to accede to. It gets in the way. But insofar as what we do as an agency, what we put out, it will not be included. But until we can lawfully prohibit releasing them, it doesn't make any sense not to put it out in the release to local media, but not to the public.
Yeah, so I think, all right, so I mean, I won't talk right now about a policy, but I will talk about practice. And I think the most important considerations that should be guiding how BPD handles mugshots in particular is that the department, in my opinion, should not be making it easy for kind of biographical information about people who have been arrested, along with pictures, to be easily kind of archived or gathered in one place electronically for easy things like internet search, Google searches, et cetera, right? So I think the department should be making that process as difficult as possible, simply because that's information that follows people around forever. It's also information that, again, an arrest is not yet indicator of even kind of malfeasance, right? So the department should not be making that easy. Now, I actually don't know it seems to me as though, right, so first, any information that's sent out to the media, I think, it does not need to have the text be searchable, right? So sending out PDFs, that text does not need to be kind of OCR or already read. So you could kind of make it so that you can't extract the text information from those PDFs along with the mugshot. That would facilitate someone gathering all those, post them online, all the information is then searchable. In the same way that as if you were to take a photocopy of a piece of paper and then send that as the PDF, that's not easily searchable. So you can kind of obfuscate the information in that way. And then also, right, so long as the department is not posting its information picture along with, kind of text strings which have biographical information on any of its social media websites or its kind of information sent out. I think that's the most important thing as far as I'm concerned. I actually don't know, right? So I don't know where the media releases go. I have not seen, I don't think much information posted on the social media channels, but I'm also not a big follower of I don't check the channels regularly. I get the media emails, and I think those can be made, I think more protections can be built into those media emails. But again, I think if those texts were, if the text from those media emails were obscured, I think that would make it easier. When I say obscured, I mean that it's not easily extractable by digital tools. I'd have to check and see if they are, but I don't know that right now.
See Commissioner Grant unmuted. Was that your hand raised for a comment or no?
Nope.
Oh, sorry, my apologies then. All right.
I just want to say I like this change. I'm sorry I didn't bother, sorry. But I do like this change in terms of, or maybe it's not a change, Chief Murad, but I like this clarification. And the idea that Commissioner Harp has proposed, I really appreciate that as well. Because what we're finding is nationally is just these folks who are forced to try to pay to have their data removed, or and the presumption here is that they're just arrested and that's it. So I am grateful for this discussion.
I appreciate the discussion as well. I am reluctant to use terminology like making it as difficult as possible for people to obtain information to which they're lawfully entitled. And that is how the press will feel about this as well.
Well, right,
now with regard to, doing PDFs by scan rather than by the PDF function on the computer, that's something that we can discuss. It's an added layer of work for a sergeant or a lieutenant who's trying to get out a press release after an incident, and much of what you're discussing, Commissioner Harp, flies in the face of the notion of improved transparency. And that's certainly how our partners in the media are going to see it. So let me,
I just want to clarify that point, right? So first, I believe that the PDF creation tools that you have will already allow for that. And also, to be clear, when I talk about kind of making it as difficult as possible, all the information that the media is currently receiving, they would still receive. The only thing that they would not be receiving is all of the text underlying the PDF in an easily accessible, in a format which is easily readable by machines. So people can still read the information in the same way, right? It's like giving someone a piece of paper. They have all the information there. It's just that, right,
but they're not, the media is not posting our PDFs. They're not posting our PDFs, and they're not posting our, they do post the photographs at times, but they don't post our PDFs. They may take language from it. Sometimes they may even cut and paste language from it. Although they're writing their own stories, they're journalists, they're not stenographers. And so I think that there is, I do understand what you're saying. There's a difference between scanning a document so that it turns into a photograph and is not searchable, or PDFing a Word doc that ends up being searchable and also cut and pasteable. We could take into consideration doing that, but again, that's an added step. That's instead of just PDFing the Word doc that I just wrote in our department format template, it is printing it out in Word, then going to the scanner, then scanning it, then sending it back to myself as a scan of itself, which is just a photograph and can't be searched, and then sending that to the media. And I'm not certain. I kind of understand what the win is, but I don't know how usual it is that PDF even floats out in the world anyway. I'm sorry.
No, again, just to be clear, that does not need to be the workflow. I believe that the PDF creation tools that you have can do it already. If not, there are easily available PDF creation tools that can make it so that the text strings are not embedded in the PDF file. So that's the only claim that I'm making, is that if possible, BPD should prevent those text strings from being embedded in the files, so that, I don't know exactly who is on the media recipient list, but the fact that I am suggests to me that, that it's not merely limited to credentialed members of the media, right? Because I'm not one of those. And
no, but beyond the commission and the council, it's not that large.
Right. So again, and I've seen,
and BPD employees, BPD employees get it as well, but that's just,
But if I wanted as a hobby to just take all of those PDFs that BPD sends out and just post them on my personal website,
yes.
and I did not make it so that Google did not crawl that website, then all of that information then would be available permanently for all time. Now, so that would be kind of making an extra step for somebody who wanted to do that, to make it so that they also embedded that text in that document. They could go through and retype it all if they wanted to, but that's an extra step for them. And like I said, and so if it's not an extra step, if it's not increasing the workload for BPD to do that, and I don't believe that it would if the tools are there, then that seems like a very useful thing to just take away one possible way in which this data, which, as I say, you're kind of legally obligated to give, but which it prevents damage from being done from that data, which I think is actually lasting damage.
Thank you.
But the picture was the problem. I just need some really basic things explained to me, Chief. So somebody gets arrested. You got to take their picture, right? There's no way around that, right? I'm asking you, right?
No. Right.
Okay. So, and then once you take their picture, you can't not release it, right? Because, it's the press is entitled to what you have, right? So, I don't know. I'm not quite understanding I understand how you can maybe protect somebody's, from what Randall's saying is pretty smart actually, is you can maybe protect it from somebody searching the data. But, I always thought that the biggest problem was having your picture out there when you really haven't even really been convicted of a crime. But it sounds like there's nothing you can really do about that.
That is, so we don't take photos for everybody. We don't, many people don't come back to 1 North Avenue upon being taken into custody or detained. They are issued a citation in the field and released. And those who do come to be arrested, some get photographed, others don't. There are reasons sometimes for not photographing somebody if that person, depending on his or her capacity, his or her cooperation and level of cooperation. So, but if we have a photo in file, even if that photo wasn't taken at the time of the arrest, if it was taken from a previous arrest, then yes, we're going to include that, because if the media requests it, it's going to be something that we do have to provide. We are no longer going to include it in the media that we control, our social media or the forms that we create.
So you're saying you don't have to take a picture of it?
I'm saying that the procedure is to take a photo. It doesn't always get taken, because sometimes if the person isn't brought back, this goes to Rule 3. If the person isn't brought back, then there's no photo. We don't take one in the field.
Or the officer could just say, I'm not going to arrest him. I'm just going to cite him, right?
Well, within certain parameters, yes. There's certain crimes that their
And you
arrest
don't
is
get a
appropriate.
picture when you're cited. You're right. You don't get a picture when you're cited. Is that correct?
No.
But even if you are arrested, there are some instances where officers said, "I'm not going to take a picture," or he never showed up.
Well, if he was arrested, he showed up. So he's gonna that's not a reason. But we would say that that if a person is, again, a person who's incapacitated and needs to go to the hospital, and then maybe ends up going straight to court from the hospital, is not going to end up being going to be photographed. A person who is extremely uncooperative is not going to be photographed. If it's a risk to the officer, it's not. A photograph is part of the normal process, but it's not something that is done in every single instance.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So I'll just say, I'll just say right now, I don't want to continue out this particular discussion on my end, but I'm a little nervous about the amount of discretion that might go into whether or not a photograph is taken of someone who is arrested or at the station. So I would just kind of want to try to get some more information in the future about what sorts of other factors might do that, and how common it might be that someone is not photographed when they're arrested. Because again, every time there's this sort of discretionary judgment involved, the worry is that discretion will be applied more negatively towards some than towards others.
So we don't generally do press releases for lower level offenses. I mean, things that are merely a cite are not going to generate a press release. A press release is going to be for an incident that had a certain level of seriousness or a certain level of public interest because of, it's a traffic incident that tied up traffic on North Avenue for 2 hours. It's a fire that had a lot, and that would be a fire. We'd leave that to fire unless we had some role on the perimeter that ended up causing a newsworthy or media-worthy event. But the huge number of tickets that get issued, or the number of citations that get issued, don't generate press releases for the most part, unless that person was brought back here, was photographed, and then in some instances, as Deputy Chief Sullivan outlined, there's a lot of conversation. There's a conversation with the on-call state's attorney. There's a conversation with the judge. And if in that process it's determined that a citation rather than a lodging is more appropriate, the photograph may already been taken. We also may have thought that incident was serious enough to generate a press release, even though it's ultimately not determined to be something to be lodged on. But APHIS demands, the system that we use for fingerprints, et cetera, demands a photograph. And so unless those, if the machines are broken, if the person is so belligerent that taking him or her out of the cell in order to do this process is more danger to him or her and to the officer than it's worth, maybe. But those are exceptions to the rule. I don't mean to paint those as officer discretion in the sense of just, hey, I feel like it or I don't feel like it. It's driven by much different kinds of consideration. If you're here and arrested and into the cells, you're going to get photographed. And then the photograph populates the next day. One other thing that I instructed is that we are to, with regard to going forward and press releases, until that affidavit is filed, at which point there is a very detailed picture of the charges and the incident that is on record with the court. But until that happens, our press releases in general are going to be more, are going to be tighter information-wise. And the affidavit is going to be something that can then be looked at by the press for the same amount of information, and they have access to those. But that's a level of difference between an arrest, which I gather is a concern for, not gather, I understand is a concern. I agree that is the first step. And so to put out the whole story based on that first step alone is maybe premature at times and can be unnecessarily prejudicial against an individual. But the affidavit is a court document at that point. And so waiting for a fuller picture at that point is also something that I have asked be done in the future. That, and then again, using mugs or photographs when the person is wanted because he or she has been believed to commit a crime and is still out and potentially committing other crimes and is a danger to the public, or when a person is missing. Because obviously if we're seeking a missing person, we need a photograph of that missing person.
Thank you. Last comment from me. Sorry, was I cutting someone else off?
Wait, I'm sorry. Just go ahead, Randall. I can come back.
Okay, last comment from me was just, I think it should also be, I think it's also important that, releases of mugshots should not be either for kind of for punishment purposes, also not be just to satisfy public interest. So, right, so the fact that press releases are not made for every arrest means that there's some amount of discretion which is going into whether or not a press release is filed for a particular arrest. And I'm certainly concerned about the possibility that those judgments are being made by, well, the press would really want to hear this particular story, so we'll send out a press release and we'll include a mugshot. Again, I'm very sensitive to the need for the department to be transparent when asked about information, but I don't think the department should be kind of shaping what sorts of stories it thinks the public wants to hear and providing them easily accessible, kind of narratives and mugshots to meet that perceived interest. I think should be not something that BPD is doing. That's it for me.
Many press releases are in response to press inquiries. And while I agree with you that we are not to put out releases and or photographs in a manner that is punitive, nor should we be doing it in a manner that is crowing. There are times where we know that an incident has been observed by a large number of people and is going to engender public interest. And even if we do not receive a media inquiry immediately on that, we are going to put that information out. It is part of the transparency, and the absence of that is almost always to our detriment. And I'm a little bit sort of, I think there's a certain amount of pulling in two directions by folks even individuals are pulling in two directions about this topic with regard to, transparency about internal efforts, or transparency about, crime statistics, or transparency about individual incidents. But, I agree, there's a certain amount of ad hoc to it, but I think that delineating rationales for the use of photographs is an important step. I think that making it clear that it's not punitive and it's not braggadocio is an important step. But, understanding that an incident could very well turn into something if we don't talk about it first and make clear what happened, not being able to do that is a mistake.
I would just say, no, I said that was my last one, but I think it might be useful to to compare how BPD does it with how VSP does it, which
I think they do everything.
Correct, but they do it in a way which essentially puts the onus on the person receiving all the information to decide whether this is something that they want to get more information on. If they do, they have to kind of take proactive steps to access it. They're not right. So, and that's a level of consistency, which I think is
the call volume that I delineated at the beginning of this meeting, and the absence of a dedicated person to this role makes what they do impossible for us.
I would add to that the state police, you can get stopped on the side of the road, and you'll get a picture, So I mean, I don't know. I won't get stuck there. I was just going to say, John, I really, I think my biggest concern and disappointment is just people who they haven't really been convicted, and their pictures are floating around, and they got all of these charges hanging over their head. And that's the biggest thing. That's the main part that I'm concerned. But I mean, besides the elephant in the room is like most of the photos that I see of Black people. Knowing it's 94.5% white people here, it seems like most of the ones that I see are Black people. I mean, that does validate the 10% of Black folks in prison, I suppose. Or maybe it just says that we just have a higher propensity to crime. I don't know. But most of the photos that I've seen that have come out of the BPD have been Black folks. But that aside, I would say that my biggest concern besides that would be folks getting their photos out there that haven't really been convicted of a crime.
So I provided the chairman with a rough accounting of the photos that we had released on social media since the beginning of 2019, and it doesn't bear out what you've said, Commissioner, insofar as the balance. It's not most of the photos by any means, but I do hear what you're saying, and I think anyway, I hear that.
I suppose we'd have to take into account, and not to be argumentative on this one because it's really kind of moot in a way, but we have to, you know, it wouldn't be, even if it weren't most of the photos, you know, with a 5.6%, 5.4% population of Black folks in the city, it ought to be damn near hardly any of the photos.
I had a couple of questions. The email list for the press releases, how many people are on it? Do you know?
Just a moment. About 236 recipients, 140 something of which are BPD employees. The others are local media. And then, for example, for a while you received it, Commissioner, as a member of the committee to review.
Yes, I did. And then I got taken off.
When the committee dissolved.
Which is a bit capricious, but a conversation for another day.
It was when the committee dissolved, Commissioner. The committee members were taken off it.
No, it wasn't actually. It was when I complained about a signature in a press release. It was shortly after that I was taken off. And it is something that ultimately I'd like to discuss. I actually, in response to my complaint, I had gotten this email. Oh, it was one of the most traumatic emails of my life from Chief Morrison. And I've tried really hard over the months to respond to it. And I've talked to some individuals about this. In a nutshell, I decided to leave it alone because I felt she was only going to be here temporary. And then COVID happened and we've suspended the search for a new chief. And so she's on her leave now, but she might be coming back. So now it drives me back to issues that I feel need to be discussed in terms of the response that I received. But without going into that whole thing now, I'm just, I'm curious as to the determinations of who gets put on and who gets taken off the list and how often it's monitored.
As I said, I mean, it's primarily BPD employees, the local media names, the city council, and the let me see, this body, the police commission, and the Chittenden County law enforcement executives, a group of chiefs, and that's pretty much, I mean, I'd have to go through each of these names but as I look at them, I don't see, and department heads, the Burlington department heads. And so that, you know, when you're talking about 100, beyond the BPD employees, it's about 100 or so. Those groups that I just named get to that number. So
Okay.
It's not much beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Moving on to agenda item number 12, officer worn camera footage release policy.
Can I move that we table this discussion for the next meeting?
Second.
I have a second. Any discussion on tabling this till next meeting?
Just a quick discussion. This is not at all to underestimate the importance of it. I think it's very important, but I want to make sure that we do it properly.
And just for background, probably everyone in this meeting knows that there is a directive already in existence on body worn cameras. So maybe, I guess this would just be supplementing that, I don't know, but it's good background to read that policy if you haven't already before this discussion.
All in favor of tabling the agenda item 12 till next meeting, say aye or raise your hand, please.
Aye.
That is unanimous. All right, moving on to agenda item number 13, police commendations. Shannon.
So I didn't have a lot to share with you that were directly related to officers. Officers Henry and Wilson received a very nice thank you card in response to their patience and kindness in helping someone from the public out, as well as just a note in support of the police department, a couple of cards, lots of cards and flowers, and notes just generally in support of the police department. And then I have one that I'll include for next month that just came in. So that's really nice of one of our new officers, but it came in after I'd sent the group. So I don't want to make sure to give you guys a copy first before that.
All right. Moving on to agenda item number 14, commissioner updates and comments. Any updates or comments out there anyone would like to bring forth? Not seeing any. We are moving on to agenda item number 15, and this is meeting minutes approval from our June 9th, June 10th, June 16th, and June 23rd meetings.
Sorry, y'all, it was a busy June.
It's all right. So I believe the voting on this, how this works, seeing how Commissioners Grant and Durfee were not part of the commission prior to this, I believe y'all just abstain your vote for this since you can't vote for or against it. But are there any, sorry, Shireen.
Oh, I just moved to approve the minutes
Oh,
for all 4 meetings.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconds. Any discussions? All in favor, raise your hand or say aye. All not in favor? And any abstentions? All right, so I believe I have to do a roll call vote since it's not unanimous. I vote in favor of the minutes. Commissioner Harp.
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes.
Aye.
Commissioner Hershak.
Aye.
And Commissioner Hart. And Commissioner Grant, that was an abstention.
Yes.
And Commissioner Durfee, that was an abstention. All right, that was 5 yeses, 0 nays, and 2 abstentions. And move on to agenda item number 16, next meeting's agenda items. I believe we...
Thanks again, Shannon, for the meetings. For the minutes, they're very comprehensive.
I will second that. Let's see, we've tabled officer warrant camera footage. We were hoping on agenda item 10, which was a final review of the draft of the Royal Commission and Oversight, sorry. I believe we're also pushing item 9, which is President Obama's final report on 21st century policing. And I can't think of anything else to add on the agenda.
Commissioner Hughes, you had brought up earlier in the conversation about the social media. Is that
social media policy?
Yeah.
I'm glad you remembered that because I sure in the heck didn't. I'm so busy looking at these awesome minutes, you know.
They are good. All right. So I believe our next scheduled meeting will be August 25th. Is there any difficulty with that? Does that work for everybody?
Well,
I may not be available.
I was going to say that would have been my son's first day of kindergarten, but since they're pushing that start date a few weeks, then I'm good for that date too.
All right, so I guess tentatively then, August 25th will be our next meeting. We'll solidify that in the next couple of weeks. And I motion to move to executive session to discuss citizen complaints and officer discipline.
Second that motion. Oh,
That was a second by Commissioner Hughes. All in favor of all in favor of moving to executive session, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
That is unanimous. I thank everyone who joined in on this Zoom meeting for joining us here. Landon,
Is
thank you
there
for
any,
joining.
sorry, I think the expectation is there's no business after the executive session.
Correct. Is that
Correct. Just adjournment.
So
Awesome. Well,
viewers know that. I mean, I think that has to be
yeah.
okay.
clear.
My apologies. Yeah, we have no business after executive session. So I'd like to thank everybody in public that linked in for this. Thank you, Landon, for joining us as well too, and thank you, Shannon. And we will catch you all on the 25th. Thank you.